The learning and the insight continues today. We're moving straight from traceability onwards to sustainability. Blockchain for sustainability is truly an incredible use case for building ESG reporting and supply chain management, transparency and governance. Let's explore exactly how blockchain can bolster ESG reporting by ensuring data integrity and transparency at every single level. We have got some rock star experts to help bring this alive and give you actionable tools and techniques that you can apply and employ immediately to help make a difference to your work. And here to lead that discussion from CoinDesk is Eliza Gritsky.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are we feeling? Yeah, there we go. All right, thank you for joining us, and thanks to our audience for being here. I know it's the afternoon time when perhaps things get a little slow, but we hope to liven things up, right? So without further ado, I would like to ask our panel to give us a quick introduction on themselves and their work. James, you want to go first?
Sure, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure to see Dubai. What an amazing place. I've worked for about 25 years in energy resources, trying to get contracts right. And that, of course, involves a lot of data backplane. One of the companies I work with has 8,100 spreadsheets and more than 90 major line of business systems. So we work on measurement, reporting, and verification of assets and to support contract execution. And it's very important for the ESG space because we're trying to get it right. So to put it shortly, we use blockchain to try to get the data science into the right form so that we can execute the contracts as they're written.
You want to go next?
Yep, thanks. I'm Franz Borolewski, working for a French construction materials supply company named Saint-Gobain. It's over 360 years old, and they're circular economy manager for the material flow glass in German-speaking countries. Circular economy, what I mean by this is creating business models which involves the retrieval of materials from our cities and skyscrapers, for example, and involving all the system around it to bring back the material to the production process and create new products out of it.
And my name is Emmanuelle Gahn. I work at the World Trade Organization in Geneva. The WTO is an intergovernmental organization, so we work with governments and we set global rules for trade. And I have two hats. I've been doing a lot of work on digital technologies and how they can facilitate international trade, in particular blockchain. And I also lead work on small businesses at the WTO. So I come more from the regulatory perspective.
Vincent Weicker, I'm the founder of Nomina Digital. It's a technology company based in Switzerland, which developed a smart contract technology which is deployed on clouds, not on blockchains, but of course also connects to blockchains, very often to Cardano. Of course we also implement a lot of use cases with our clients, and we very much focus on energy use cases, real estate use cases and financial use cases. And especially over the last 2 years, the ESG topic is a horizontal layer across everything we do. Looking forward to discussion.
Great, thank you everyone. So we have a lot of practical experience on this panel, so I hope we can dig into that. But before we do that, just for the people in the audience that are maybe not so familiar with the space, maybe Vincent, could you just give us a very brief overview of what exactly is the promise of blockchain for sustainability, ESG, traceability?
Yeah, I think the main problem is that there obviously is a lot of ESG relevant data that is produced everywhere in the supply chains. and the supply chains are very complex. Many players are involved. The problem is that you lose actually the primary data. So when some ESG relevant events happen, for example, carbon is produced or water is consumed or whatever, then this information gets lost already at the next neighbor of the supply chain. So, however, on the other hand, there are a lot of reporting obligations on ESG topics from investors, from clients, and from regulators, of course. And what every company at the moment is doing, they have to make a lot of guesses about what is happening in their supply chains. And the models they're using are very high level. They would not resolve actually they would not resolve particularly low carbon products, for example, because the models are just not fine granular enough. The blockchain, the idea of MRV, which is also many other companies are working on, is that you put at the moment when the ESG relevant events happen, you undergo MRV process, measurement, recording, verification process, which results in a certificate which is verified by third parties, which could be used by everybody in the supply chain to do proper reporting on that. And that also, of course, allows to put some kind of, for example, credit ideas on top of that. So you could, so if you do particular rail, for example, you have a low carbon product, then you could also transfer the benefits to somebody else and start trading the benefits that you generate. This problem is very material, and every company is driven by, as I already said, the investors, the clients and the regulators to converge to something like MRV to try to capture the primary data directly from their suppliers. So it's just a matter of time when everybody will speak about how can we make this primary data accessible to everybody and how would those systems look like. And I think this is a perfect case for blockchains because it's neutral, it's global, it's easily accessible for everybody. So this is a perfect technology fit.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds a little bit like it's a form of accounting, but why are we then talking about MRV? Like, why do we need those three components to sustainability, traceability solutions? Maybe, James, you want to jump in since you brought that up in your intro.
Yeah, sure, thank you. I think, so MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification, if there's anything that the digital transition has taught us is that we can quickly drown ourselves in data. And one of the central problems as you try to expand out a set of counterparties is they all have their own data. So why you need measurement, reporting, and verification is we have to agree on the source of the data and that source of measurement. We then have to agree on what protocols or frameworks, what standards are being used to shape the data. The payloads themselves have to be conformant to these specifications. And then you have verification on top of that, because if we're going to actually execute with data integrity, smart contract automation, then we have to have a lot of trust in the data because we will replicate at scale problems if we don't. So the measurement is critical for aggregating the data, for making sure that we're sharing the right sources. The reporting is critical for compliance requirements, and those regimes that have long-standing compliance in place tend to be able to enter voluntary spaces easier because they have this structure. Verification, if we don't verify it, there is no data integrity, because at the end of the day, the entire blockchain movement is really about sharing facts, not keeping my own facts. It's about us having what you see is what I see when it comes to a contract execution or our analysis of an asset. So without those three poles, and then you have to add tokenization for our space. So you put a D in front of it, you have digital measurement, you have reporting, digital reporting, you've got verification, and then you have tokenization, which makes an object that shares these qualities and capabilities with the counterparties.
You mentioned compliance, and I'd love to bring you in, Emmanuel, at this point to give us an idea of like, are those things that we're discussing, are they in line with the reality and direction of regulation globally?
Yeah, so I mean, what we see on the regulatory front is a big push at the international level through the SDGs Kyoto Convention, etc., but also a lot of legislation at the national level, which is not only increasing in terms of the number of regulations that are being put in place, but we also see a move from more voluntary regulations or guidelines to mandatory requirements. And this has an impact on companies, of course, and really creates a market for ESG reporting. Now, the EU is really leading this effort in many respects, and if I can flag a few regulations that are being put in place, I mean, you have the new battery regulation that will be phased in as of 2024 up to 2026. There's the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product regulation as well that was adopted in September 2023, so very recently, just a few months ago, along with the energy label regulation, and they imposed new requirements in terms of sustainability, in terms of the design and performance of the products. There are also discussions on a directive on corporate sustainability due diligence, and as a matter of fact, there's already legislation in place in a number of EU member states. Germany has one in place since January 2023 that requires large German companies to assess risks and environmental violations, and they have to put in place risk management, monitoring, and reporting requirements, and there are actually very stiff fines if they don't comply. And you have sort of similar legislation in France and Norway, so a lot happening. And one very important development is the digital products passport as part of this the EU directive that I mentioned, the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products directive that was adopted in September a couple of months ago, which requires to collect information along the entire supply chain to allow consumers, but also other supply chain actors to know what materials have been used and to be able to better understand the environmental impact of these materials and of the products. So there are a number of new requirements, and for example, the battery passport will have to include information on the carbon footprint, material sourcing, the adherent percentage of recycled materials, battery lifetime, etc. So a lot of new requirements are being put in place that companies have to abide by. I mean, they have to comply with these requirements. And I can tell you there's a lot of nervousness among companies, not only small ones. A couple of months ago, I had a meeting with the German Industry Association, and they were extremely concerned that some of their suppliers, located in particular in developing countries, may not be able to fulfill the new requirements that are being put in place. And so this is where technology comes in, and where a technology like a blockchain can be very interesting. And it's actually quite interesting to see that when this digital product passport was proposed by the European Commission, a couple of big industry associations in the EU were very prompt to say that this digital product passport needed to be interoperable, open, and decentralized. Now, no need for me to tell you which technology actually ticks these different boxes. So there's a market, there's a need, and I think that a technology like blockchain has actually a bright future when it comes to ESG reporting because of all this push at the regulatory level.
Mm-hmm. Franz, I see you smiling. Do you want to jump in?
There had been a lot of topics mentioned, which are kind of related to my work. As you said, the legislative framework is evolving in the area of ESG reporting, or even going further in identifying products with creating a digital product passport. And as Vincent mentioned, blockchain would be a really great tool to tokenize so far non-tangible assets in terms of CO2 footprint and make it somehow a tradable good or a transferable good to something, which is a huge enabler in terms of a tool set. And with the verification process, it's something which is closely connected to what we are in the business doing, because we need to record what is going into the process and out of the process, and the additional environmental benefit is added value to this. But so far, if it's just about supply chain tracking, what big companies had as a problem is how to communicate with each other, how to find a standard or protocol to exchange data. And if it's going further, this discussion, that's something you can do with, for example, cloud-based supply chain tracking tools. And what I have seen is in circular or in blockchain projects, that they were kind of an enabler and moderator in this type of discussion. And then big companies said, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. Now we know how to speak with each other. But further question is, what would be the case where blockchain as an enabler is linked to that is creating so much value or prosperity out of it that it's not an option anymore for companies to implement it. And here, as you said, the digital product passport comes in, because with this verification process and digital product passport, we would be able to create not 30 products a year or something like this and do the LCA analysis. It would be on scale, so being able to create thousands of products, and that's the way it might be the thinking might be needed to change a little bit, so that we are able to create a specific product with specific identity and inherent characteristics like CO2 footprint, energy used for it, and an own identity where it all came from.
Maybe a quick note on the product environmental footprint. I think the PEFs, the product passes that you mentioned, very much go into the direction indeed of what we are envisioning, to really attach the primary carbon emissions when they happen to the product, which is very different to the greenhouse gas protocol reporting, which is every company tries to generate a whole report for the whole company. What is the carbon footprint based on the high-level models, the high-level data, whatever is in SAP basically, whereas the PEF goes exactly in our direction. I think this is right. This is exactly the sweet spot for blockchains. And the new component, I think, also to it. And this requires a lot of new thinking. Yeah? I think this is a breakthrough for our technology, the PEF.
Yeah, I think that we're facing probably the largest joint project outside of maybe the original laying out of the internet protocols when it comes down to addressing what the panelists are putting forward, which is the amount of complexity that is about to enter because of the different amount of protocols, the different amount of frameworks, GHG emissions frameworks. There's 65 of them at last count. There's a protocol zoo out there. So what can blockchain bring to that is an organizing principle, especially public blockchains that allow us to have that translucency of data. So I think that there's a real interesting requirement to work together, and I think Emmanuel nailed it, which is interoperability. And what do we mean by interoperability? Well, we have to have, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development says the only way to actually get to net zero for the amount of actors who have already pledged net zero is alignment of compliance and voluntary. So we need linkage between markets. We need linkage between all of these protocol zoos. And it really going to come down to, we're replicating some of that in the blockchain space now. There are too many protocols. There are too many platforms. And as Charles said in his address last night, We've been incentivized to create islands because we want people on our islands, but we're now approaching the next generation, which is how do we actually have assets that could flow freely but maintain data integrity and trust as they flow. So I just want to make a quick announcement that we are launching a Cardano bridge at this summit. And our intent was, we work with Corda, which is a large DeFi banking network, global in nature. And the Cardano public transparency brings the ability to have that permission state where you have all of the facts sort of together and aggregating, and a public state where you can bring that transparency to the world, anybody who wants to scrutinize the data or what gets issued into the public state. So our Cardano bridge is actually coming out now, and we're hoping that this is just another trigger for the types of action that's required now, which is that assets do not get trapped on platforms.
So if I may jump in, I mean, this is a very, very important point, especially for companies who are not in the blockchain space, but are observing what's happening in terms of regulation and are getting extremely nervous about how they will go about it. When they hear about blockchain, very often they are completely lost, because indeed it's a very complex world, and there is this issue of interoperability. And so I think such efforts are critical to be able to scale up the project and drive adoption of blockchain projects, but we also need to work more on education, and I think it's a point that was made in the previous panel as well. There's somewhat of a big gap between the blockchain world and people who are really in the middle of it, and you talk about R3 Corda and Cardano and staking, and companies who have never had to deal with blockchain, especially small businesses. So we need to find a way also to pass this information to them in a very simple manner, and to really show them the value, what it can bring, but in simple terms and not technical terms. And talking about indeed the advantages that it can bring, the interoperability, because one of the main concerns is what happens if I choose one blockchain and then yes, will my data be actually captured and I can't then use it for other projects? And this is a big issue for small businesses who supply a number of different bigger businesses. They don't want to be on too many different blockchains or have to deal with too many different processes. So this is really something that needs to be, I think, kept in mind when solutions are being developed, because this is really what will drive adoption.
I totally agree. So to summarize, it's about reducing friction throughout the whole process and integrate it into the existing system of a company. So to make the data and benefits accessible for the normal guys in the company, and to integrate it in the existing business processes. And this would be a great achievement in order to scale the tool or the use of the tool.
Yeah, I mean, I guess especially in when we're talking about global supply chains, there's so many different types of companies, from the small cocoa farmer to the Nestle, the cocoa traders of the world. So if everything is to be monitored, reported and verified, I guess all these companies will be making very different blockchains, will be making very different choices as to what infrastructure they use, and therefore we need to make sure everything connects really well. But to bring this together a little bit, and also touching upon the issue of global regulation that we were talking about before, is there that coordination level on the international scene? Because as soon as we, governments, and we've seen this a lot more in the last year or so, they are starting to have very different priorities when it comes to blockchain and Web3, right? We are seeing very different paradigms of regulation arise. So how can those regulatory principles that then get translated into policy, how can we make those compatible and make sure they are all connected?
Yeah, I might have an angle on that, which is more bottom up. So we are searching really for use cases and companies which are large enough so they just start certifying doing MRV now, because they see immediate benefits for their customers, because they know there is, for example, a bank in real estate industry, for example, there are banks which want to have proper reports, and they are in messes with a lot of due diligences they have to do. So we try to, at the moment, in first order, just to start with producing certificates, identifying use cases, which then would also be very helpful, I think, for the regulators to actually look what the benefit is, and then start to regulate it, or based on that they could formulate standards and so on. Because I would be a bit afraid that if you start now with setting standards for the whole world, it's just not possible, because it's so big. It's an infinitely large system. You mentioned there might be a farmer in India who, of course, I mean, we could not connect his systems to anything at the moment. So I think the best that at least from our small technology company we can do is identify, start to work with reputable companies, large companies, identify the first use cases, and then work together with, try to work together with organizations like yours and bring you the use cases, and then you could start to standardize. That would be my approach. So I think starting now with setting standards would be very difficult, right? There's no, because it's infinitely large, and one needs to start somewhere.
What would be your advice, or let's say, what would be the top 3 things that you would tell a company that is looking at integrating blockchain for their supply chains? What are the top 3 priorities they should be thinking about? How should they sort of pick that technology?
So we talked about the legislative framework which is developing at the moment, and there are great initiatives like the digital product passport. So this given hint and where additional benefit could lie. But you really need to get aware of the capabilities of blockchain as a tool to notify in which area it would make sense. To get back to the example, of the product generation, or you need to find a business model where the accelerated version would outpass the capabilities of a big company by far, and create so much benefit that it would allow or create a big enough incentive to make a technology change, or to integrate a new technology into your system of a company, which is of course correlated with certain risks. And therefore you have the balance of new advantage, added value to your customer, and risks on the other hand you need to will to take. So that's a really difficult thing, because if you find already a new business case in a company, to push it through and make a new product of it is already quite hard. And then to find a leverage on this and scaling it up to make the whole process so much more profitable. If you found this, then it's the really perfect use case for blockchain at the moment. So to implement it to really implement it. And I think the whole economics or ecosystem is evolving at the moment, and we are not far away from reaching this point where you actually are having a broad enough awareness of this topic that such a scalable process will be apparent in the near future. And then we are going from prototyping, doing some POCs, to trying really to implement it in the business, in daily business.
I think for those looking at the blockchain journey, the companies really have to get their heads around the meaning of their data and their partnerships. Very few of these companies actually have a set of assets. The bigger the company, the more likely they have a multiplicity of systems where the truth is stored. And very few of them have a source of truth internally. And in blockchain, we're talking about having a source of truth throughout a supply chain. So if the value, the level of process re-engineering that's then required to actually execute value in the blockchain state, so to have shared data on ledger that your counterparties are sharing requires the company to actually process re-engineer. I've worked with Exxon and Chevron and Shell and ConocoPhillips and large multinationals, and the challenge seems to be that it's hard to operationalize. It's very easy to get the digital transformation people in and agreeing that they want to apply themselves to blockchain and they think there's a magic property that will emerge. But the reality is that the operational people who have to get the stuff done have a big barrier there. And that barrier is, you want me to change how I do it. And this is just inside of one company, and now we need to take that model. It's been called master data management, it's been called, you know, enterprise application integration, source of truth. We have to take that model and go throughout the counterparties on the supply chain. So I think this is where ESG and carbon and credits and stuff shine, because a lot of the use cases that we worked on headed right for SAP. Because SAP touches 85% of that data, touches more than 90% of the world's GDP. And they don't really want to be replaced. So if you can't bring a value that requires them to actually rethink how that data works, you're going to be stuck. You're never going to get into operations. So I think, to answer your question, real openness to share your data and share your execution with the other side of the contract is number one. Number two, tolerance for process re-engineering and endurance, persistence. Because to realize the value of blockchain inside of a large corporation, you have to get a lot of adherents on the boat. So that's education and evangelism would be the finals.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess, have you seen in your work the difficulty of companies that really don't want to share their data, and particularly when it comes to public blockchain? I can imagine that some of the larger corporations with very big supply chains, parts of which are very well kept secrets. Have you seen that they just don't really want to put their data on a public blockchain?
Well, this is why carbon is very interesting, because there isn't an SAP to displace. There is a requirement to share the data across the contract divide, to do custody transfer of the data. Scope 3 requires that you know the footprint of all your suppliers, and you can supply your footprint data to all your customers. So now we have a use case that actually drives that, and we don't have, it's not Redwater, it's not buried in enterprise kit. It's a relatively new use case that everybody's got to get on board pretty quickly for us to realize the purpose of it. So I think that you need to pick the right use case, and I think this panel is all talking about the right use cases here, which is a new accounting paradigm with an intrinsic quality. Carbon is in everything, and now we need to measure it at a level we've never had to do before. So the answer to your question is, on most of their processes, they're like, nope, I don't even want to go there. And you have to remember, they're confined to existing compliance financial requirements, existing compliance reporting requirements. They can't change that stuff. But along comes carbon and this new purpose-driven economy, which will give us the use case that drives the adoption.
Mm-hmm. One thing to add, perfectly agree with you. And this whole framework, which is existing, as I would classify it as external factors. Add to it an intrinsic factor or intrinsic motivation, like the most common one in all companies is making money. If you find a connection to a business model with this, you have the perfect setup to implement the solution.
Emmanuel, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that a few years ago, there was a lot of reluctance from companies because they didn't necessarily see the value. Of course, moving to a new system has some costs. And so they were not necessarily ready to make the shift and to really look into a new way of tracing products. But what I see in all the discussions that I have with companies is that there has been a significant shift over the past, I would say, 2 or 3 years. Legislation also being one of the reasons why they're looking into it, because there's a clear use case, as you were saying, James. And there has been, I think, a shift in mindset, and because there are now all these requirements that oblige them, force them to look into it, we see much more openness to new solutions and blockchain-based solutions, including on permissionless blockchains. So I do see quite a significant shift that has happened over the past, I would say, 6 years.
Maybe a last addition to what James said. Yeah, of course, companies are very concerned about sharing data with their clients, with their competitors. They are also concerned about regulatory backdoors, maybe. Regulations might, once there is a platform, regulators might look at it. They would not want to share any, for example, production-relevant data, where, of course, the carbon emission would happen. But they only want to share data on a need-to-know basis, no? Or must-share basis. And that's also the purpose of certificates. No? You undergo an MRV process. In that MRV process, the parties have a lot of insights, potentially, about production processes, whatever. But then at the end, there's a certificate which captures only the information needed for reporting. But even this certificate, of course, is not for public. No? Even that certificate, the metadata and so on, that are not public on Cardano, but the real metadata are stored somewhere else. Yeah, so of course, we are designing systems which don't make like the whole balance sheet public to everybody. No? Even not the carbon emission, but nevertheless, you have all the benefits of ownership, basically ownership transfer. Who owns the carbon emission, the certificate, and who has access rights to it. So I think the system that you need to design must not be a data monster. It must not be a platform in the middle, for example, developed by a large tech giant, but it must be Web3 compliant. However, of course, respecting all the confidentiality, GDPR rules.
I think it's super important that we don't lose touch with the S and the G. Because sustainability, capital E, everybody talks about capital E, but this same property of data democratization that you're talking about will service the smaller player. There's a tremendous risk right now that we put carbon reporting standards in place that only the large companies can fulfill and further imbalance the system. But with truly democratized data, we can actually enable the smaller players to not have data be the differentiation to your other question. And that we do a lot of work with First Nations, and it is only because there are instruments in Canada where I'm from where the operators need to report their resource development, that we're able to make those contracts right for the First Nations. It's the only way. Well, what better mechanism than a public blockchain in order to express the core set of facts that are principal to any contract execution? You know how many contracts can come from one measurement? There's as many as 80 different contract types that can come from an operator-reported volume. But everybody makes their own volumes, then we get broken contracts. So I think to your point, we're raising the level of efficacy in the contract state because we're sharing the data. So I agree 100%.
And that could also lower the costs for some of those communities so they can also participate in these economies. Okay, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Unfortunately, thank you for joining us. Thank you, James, for announcing your new bridge. I hope it works well, and I hope it gets a lot of traction in the next few days. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to our audience.
Thank you.